But he should look on the south lawn of the White House.
Fires for the last several
On an international flight, look for that flight to be diverted to either Canada or Mexico. So that's Canada or Mexico. And as you've been listening to network news, they have confirmed that 4 major airlines have crashed. Airliners have crashed. 3 of those 4 were heading to LAX. Now, among those 3, 2 are American airline flights, 1 a United Airlines flight. Let me quickly go through each one of these flights for you. First of all, American Airlines Flight 11. It was a Boeing 767 en route from Boston to Los Angeles. It crashed into the World Trade Center. The plane was carrying 81 passengers, 9 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. Also, there's American Airlines Flight 77. It was a Boeing 757 en route from Dulles Airport in Washington, or near Washington, to Los Angeles International Airport. That crashed into the World Trade Center, and that plane was carrying 58 passengers, 4 flight attendants, and 2 pilots. There's also the United Airlines Flight 175, a Boeing 767. That flight was bound from Boston to Los Angeles. It was carrying 56 passengers, 2 pilots, 7 flight attendants. The airline would not say where that plane crashed. Now, if you think you have a loved one that may be on that flight, we have 2 very important hotline numbers for you to call. If you think your loved one was on an American Airlines flight, here's the hotline. It is 800-245-0999. 800-245-0999. That's American Airlines hotline. The United Airlines hotline is 800-932-8555. Once again, United Airlines hotline, 800-932-8555. And as I said, there's still 50 domestic flights in the air, 22 international flights in the air, and they're said to be safe. They're just trying to get to their destination. That's just in case you are waiting for someone who is up in the air right now. Let's get you caught up in some of the other information that in regards to this disaster that's going on. Speaking of airports, there are a number of traffic problems in and around LAX due to security measures. First of all, the Century Boulevard off-ramps from the eastbound and westbound Glenn Anderson 105 freeway have been shut down. These are all for precautionary measures for security. The off-ramps leading to LAX from the northbound and southbound San Diego 405 freeway have all been shut down. So there are going to be some serious traffic problems in and around the Los Angeles International Airport on the 105 freeway and the 405 freeway. If you intend on taking one of those off-ramps, it's not going to be available for you. So try to keep that in mind as you travel throughout Southern California. Let's talk about theme parks right now. All 4 major theme parks have been shut down as a precautionary measure, and that is Disneyland, Knott's Berry Farm, Universal Studios, Magic Mountain. All 4 of these parks have been shut down. Also, as a precautionary measure, the border between the U.S. and Mexico down near Tijuana and San Diego has also been closed, so no traffic through the border as well. For sports fans, you may not have heard yet, but all major league games, including the Angels game today in Anaheim, and the Dodgers game tonight in San Diego have been canceled, so there will be no baseball tonight. And let me read you this real quickly. Los Angeles Police Chief Bernard Parks has told reporters that department personnel from the Anti-Terrorist Division are being deployed to look at local places that could be potential targets of terrorists. He did not elaborate, but what we assume is that they're being as safe as possible and trying to secure as many buildings that could potentially be of a target for terrorists, and they're trying to make sure that all those buildings are safe and the traffic through them is safe as well. Okay, so that's the latest information when it comes to news affecting the Southern California area. We're going to stay on top of the situation. Right now, we're going to throw it back to Network News and Peter Jennings.
Or apparently, or you could speculate, chosen to give the terrorists the very biggest bang for their effort.
And it's a very interesting point you make, because again, our assumptions tend to go when we see huge explosions like this. None of us understanding visually the power of explosives, that there were explosives on board, and so you're quite right. It may indeed have been the aircraft explosion.
I mean, John Nance could help us with this, but when you hear the amount of fuel, very flammable aeronautical fuel that's loaded onto a plane for a 3,000-mile trip or something, that's going to give you quite an explosion. Flight 800, which was an international flight, to those who saw it, was an incredible explosion.
John, if you'd sit at your station for a second, I'm just going to go and try to check one piece of information, and in that period of time, we're going to try to give you a little better sense of what's of the disaster at the trade towers today. Here's something we've compiled, and we compile it as we go along.
I was standing next to One World Trade Center, and then all of a sudden I heard rumbling, and we all started running away from it. The glass like blew out and threw me onto the sidewalk, and I couldn't see for like 20 seconds. And then I started seeing vaguely the street, and I just started walking, and my eyesight came back.
I see you're bloody. You have dust all over you.
Yeah, it was bad. It was like a dust storm or something. Like I couldn't see anything.
How badly are you hurt?
I have no idea.
As soon as she got hit, I was thrown to a window. So I was very lucky to get out. There's a lot of people that didn't get out. There's a lot of people coming down the stairs, burnt up. It's bad.
We just come out of Tower 1. We were walking towards Broadway. They're saying, move along, move along, move along. I looked up as soon as we got across the street. I looked up, I saw the tower start to buckle. I just turned and ran, ducked down, put a jacket over my head. 3 or 4 of us huddled together, and it was just black everywhere.
Were you covered? Were you hit with debris?
No. But I mean, I was ducked behind a subway cover, so I put with the jacket over. The 3 of us, all of us huddled together. There was, dust and whatnot everywhere, but it was.
Building has just come down. The second everyone's being asked to get down, come down.
Can't even look at it because all I can see are people. I don't see a building. I see people. People hurt. Children without mothers and fathers tonight.
If you're just joining us, you probably already know the World Trade Center towers, the Twin Towers, the New York landmarks have collapsed and are gone. The Pentagon has been hit by a airplane, a series of hijackings apparently today at the root of this. What we know is hundreds, if not thousands, are injured, no count on the deceased yet, and that the investigation, a massive investigation, is just beginning to unfold.
But John, I stepped aside there, among other things, the moment to try to get some sort of sense from people who talk to, because as soon as this happens, people begin to think about a response. And we don't expect a response to come in the immediate future by any means. But I was just talking to Charlie Gibson from Good Morning America, and he'd been thinking about the same thing, that the response to this from the United States is going to have to be massive. They have to accomplish something in some way, because so much of the response to terrorism before by a large nation such as this, which is not impotent but very limited in its capacity to operate at this kind of level. You were mentioning earlier the attacks against Osama bin Laden's training camps in Afghanistan. In retrospect, they spent, as you pointed out, more than $1 million per cruise missile. I forgot how many they sent. They didn't get anything. They didn't get anything. They didn't do anything. So it's an enormous challenge for a powerful nation to respond in an effective way. And the Pentagon is still burning, and today the World Trade Center towers have gone. Diane Sawyer is down in Times Square at the moment, and among other things, I think has been trying to get some grasp of the number of casualties involved. It must be very difficult, Diane.
It's impossible, Peter, no matter how many people you call. And of course, no matter what the facts we get now, one can only imagine what the facts will be later. I want to give you a sense of what it's like here in Times Square right now. Because if you look outside, we have hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of people standing outside, just stopping still, a kind of respectful witness, looking up at the screens where we're broadcasting the pictures. They can't hear the sound. They are simply looking at the wordless horror and standing to show, in a way, respect. And I want to show you something else, because people have been sent home from Times Square, and across the way, the construction workers who were building the Toys R Us building next door to us just hung their signs outside. God bless America, and pray for families and victims. And we can only, of course, add to that as crisply as we try to report what's happening here today, we join them. And this is not just another story, even for reporters who've been trained to do this for so long. A few things to add since this morning. We were on the air, of course, live when suddenly we get word of that first explosion at the World Trade Center, the first building. And initially, of course, we didn't know if it was an accident. We didn't know what had happened. And then we were on the air live when the second plane came in and the second plane hit. And I want to show you now. This is what we were seeing live on the air. And as you've expressed before, Peter, the combination of disbelief and horror and simple prayer for somebody to save the people who were inside that building is all anybody can do, as an entire network is broadcasting live something so unimaginable. I have talked, as you all have, and as George Stephanopoulos reported, to the people who were inside as these scenes were taking place. We now see the first collapse, which of course took place about 10 a.m. Eastern Time, and then it would be about 28 minutes later that we would see the second collapse of the second building. And while we're watching the scene, each person desperate to stop this tape and go and do something. All we can do is relive the horror each time we see it. I have talked to people who are inside the building, one of them Fran Martin, who is the aunt of someone who works here at ABC, and she was saying that the first experience inside the building was that earthquake-like feeling a number of people have mentioned, and then something else in an eerie, silent, kind of mournful foliage. You saw paper just wafting out in all directions, and it was so mysterious to everyone. They couldn't imagine what had happened. The paper was scattering, and we've now read some 3 miles out, way across the river, the paper from those floors. As they came down the stairs, we're told that people were remarkably calm, were remarkably respectful of each other as they were making their way down. Even though a number of them had lived through that bombing 8 years ago, a number of them remembered what it was when the bomb went off in the basement of the World Trade Center. And of course, as we now know, if the cyanide gas had not vaporized in those bombs, that it would have been a cataclysm even beyond what was experienced then, so they could all relive it as they were making their way down. Now we're watching the scenes as the building is collapsing and people are running from it. People are covered with this kind of spectral suit from the building's collapse itself. I want to point out again, and you've talked about it too, Peter, all the firefighters were immediately called on duty. All the firefighters immediately raced in from wherever they were to help out, all the emergency medical service personnel. This was a great display of human concern and human consideration. And you've mentioned before, we have this report that 200 firefighters are now missing, and yet they have done everything they can. Every hospital is open, every hand is on deck, every doctor is standing by in the city of New York with all this courage and struggle and still heartbreak out there in the streets right now. So that's it from Times Square, Peter.
Thank you very much, Diane. I remember working with Diane on the Millennium broadcast on New Year's Eve 2000. Diane had such a joyful time in Times Square. It is, whatever you think of New York in general, it is a place where people from around the world gather to express themselves, and so we'll go back there on occasion to get some, so you really get some sense of the world in Times Square. And President Bush has been on the phone today to a variety of world leaders, clearly discussing this with them at the highest possible level. And perhaps they're all as confused as the rest of us are as to what has happened, who perpetrated these acts of terrorism in the United States, and what is to be done in response. Though this is perhaps, we're only 4 hours since this actually happened, and perhaps it is not quite the time to begin to think about the precision of a response, but a response will be required of some magnitude that will mean something from the United States if one is ever able to pin down exactly who the perpetrators were. We told you that the president was in Florida this morning, where he'd intended to talk about education today and was coming back to Washington. He's made it as far as Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, where he landed about an hour and a bit ago, just before